Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear evidence from another former member of the TMO staff. Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Sir, good morning. May I call Sacha Jevans?
Thank you. Ms. Jevans, I understand. Good morning. I understand you're willing to make the affirmation. So the words are on the screen in front of you. Would you like to read them out, please?
Thank you. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Now sit down and make yourself comfortable. Right. Good. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Thanks, sir. First of all, would you mind confirming your name for the record?
Yes, Sacha Jevans.
Good morning, Ms. Jevans. First of all, thank you very much for attending to give evidence today. It's much appreciated. If, during the course of my questioning, you don't understand the question or it's unclear, please don't hesitate to say so, and I'll either repeat the question or rephrase it. Also, if at any time during examination you require a break, please don't hesitate to say so. Now, you've prepared a number of statements for the inquiry, but the one I'd like you to look at today is that dated the 8th of February 2019 and can be found at TMO 0000893.
Mr. Kinnear, I'm sorry to interrupt you at such an early stage, but I have to say that my scrolling transcript is not scrolling. I don't think my colleagues are either. I don't know whether others in the room...
Mine is.
Yours is working. Especially yours is working. Yeah. I don't know how long this might take to sort out, but do you want to have it working before you go on?
I'm all right. I can manage.
We can manage for the time being. Yeah. Ali, can you manage for the time being without it? Yeah. Thank you. I think we all feel that we can manage without it for the time being, but obviously we'd like to have it sorted out as soon as you can.
Thank you, sir.
Right. I'm sorry to
no, thank you.
break into your questions like that.
First of all, Ms. Jevans, have you read that statement recently?
Yes, I have.
And can you confirm that its contents are true?
Yes, I can.
Have you discussed your statement or evidence with anyone before coming here today?
No, I haven't.
And for the avoidance of doubt, all the exhibits to that statement are taken into the record. Now, the first topics I'd like to discuss with you today are your qualifications and training. Now, at paragraph 6 of your witness statement, which can be found there on the screen, you say that you've worked in housing management for 25 years following your degree, which was in housing management. Now, before joining the TMO, did you receive any particular training in relation to fire safety at all?
No, I didn't know.
Anything specific in relation to fire safety in high-rise buildings, can you remember?
No.
Did you receive any training about cladding on high-rise buildings and the risks that flow from that?
No.
Were you aware of the risks of applying cladding to high-rise buildings?
No, not the technical aspects, no.
Before joining the TMO, did you have any training on health and safety risk management at all?
From my recollection, I had probably some high-level strategic sort of training in health and safety, but nothing ever specific on fire safety training.
And after you joined the TMO, did you have any, first of all, health and safety risk management training?
I recall one set of training which was delivered after we had a consultant that that did a review of our health and safety arrangements, Matt Hodson, and we had some training then, and that was very much about director level training on your roles and responsibilities on the broadest sense of health and safety, from my recollection.
And can I take it from that it didn't cover the specifics of fire safety or fire safety management?
Not from my recollection, no.
Now, just picking up your reference there to Mr. Hodgson, if we just look for the sake of completeness at paragraph 77 of your witness statement, which is at page 15, there you go, the final sentence, I recall receiving training on matters such as safety leadership from an external consultant called Mr. Hodgson. Can you remember now when that training took place?
I can't say exactly, but I think it could have been around 2013.
And did it come after the report he prepared for the TMO?
Yes, it did, yeah.
And apart from the training that flowed from Mr. Hodgson's report, did you receive any other health and safety training?
No, not that I'm aware of, not at the TMO, no.
Now, the second matter I'd like to discuss with you today is your role and responsibilities whilst at the TMO. Now, you state that directorial responsibility for health and safety lay initially with Anthony Parks and then Barbara Matthews when she succeeded him. Can you help us with what aspects of your job required health and safety oversight?
Yes, I had an operations role, so that was quite generic, and I had a broad area of responsibility across a number of teams at the TMO. And so my responsibility was to make sure that those operational teams understood their health and safety responsibilities, and also the contractors that we worked with, that they absolutely complied with legislation on behalf of the TMO, as well as our consultants. So it was a sort of broad overview role.
Thank you, Ms. Jevans. Now, can we look at the TMO's health and safety policy from February 2012, which can be found at TMO 100244402. And there we go, the date. Sorry, I should say February 2016 there. And if we look at paragraph 2.9 on page 3, and we see there 2.9 provides for the responsibility of the Operations Directorate, and it says resident safety in particular in the areas of fire safety, gas safety, electrical safety, Legionella prevention and water quality, and lift safety, taking a joint role with the health and safety team in relation to certain aspects of health and safety management, such as managing asbestos risk and coordinating fire risk assessment actions. Thirdly, coordinating property site visits and inspections, tours and audits through on-site neighbourhood staff and their managers, procuring the appropriate contracts in order to establish an effective and compliant planned preventative and maintenance programme for all plant and equipment across the TMO portfolio, establishing appropriate reporting tools and statistics in order to demonstrate compliance as above, monitoring the health and safety performance of the consultants and contractors under the control, and ensuring senior managers attend the TMO's Health and Safety Committee, where health and safety compliance across the company is reported, discussed and monitored. That's the final one. Now, that list set out at 2.9 would suggest a significant operational involvement in health and safety matters. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
And in particular regarding resident fire safety?
I think, yes, it's certainly in terms of the operational aspects and the delivery of the work by contractors and the actions that come out of the fire risk assessments was responsibility of the Operations Directorate.
And that broad and significant oversight would require significant competent management from the operational side. Would you agree?
Yes.
And significant competent oversight from you in particular?
Yes.
Now, could we go back to your witness statement and paragraph 20? So that's at TMO 0000893, page 4. And the paragraph 20 there, you list the 4 directorates that reported to you, starting with the top neighbourhood management. Now, that was led by Teresa Brown, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Secondly, the Customer Service Centre, that was led by Olivia Hutchinson, who reported to Teresa Brown, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Thirdly, supported housing, which was led by Shamshun, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And finally, asset management and regeneration, led by, you can't remember the first interim position, but then later by Simon Throp, then Mark Anderson, and finally by Peter Madison, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, in terms of line management, is it right that you were the direct line manager for Teresa Brown and Mark Anderson, who was then succeeded by Peter Madison?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, can you help us with responsive repairs? Who within the TMO had operational responsibility for responsive repairs?
The operational responsibility for Repairs Direct, which was a separate company set up, was there were a number of different directors, but latterly Graham Webb.
Now, is it right that the managing director of Repairs Direct, the TMO subsidiary, reported to you?
I think the way that we structured the organisation was that he had a sort of dotted line management to myself, but actually the responsibility was to the Repairs Direct Board. And on the Repairs Direct Board sat a number of directors, myself, Barbara Matthews, Graham Webb himself, an independent member and a resident member. So it was a board collective responsibility to oversee Repairs Direct as a company.
And you sat as a director on that board from 2013 onwards, is
That's
that
right,
correct?
yes.
Thank you. Now, as the executive director responsible for neighbourhood management, what responsibility did you hold for the fire safety aspects of neighbourhood management?
I would say on the neighbourhood management, I had overall responsibility through Teresa Brown around the aspects of the estate services assistance. I think they were a key part of fire safety, and also the housing management and the housing officers, the teams within the housing management directorate around that sort of support and tenancy management function.
Thank you. And were you the director responsible for meeting the needs and safety of vulnerable residents, whether under the supported housing scheme run by Hash Shamshun or under general housing led by Teresa Brown?
Overall, they sat within my responsibility, yes.
And as the executive director responsible for assets and regeneration, did you have responsibility for ensuring that those assets had appropriate fire safety measures in place?
I would say yes. I had a very experienced director, Peter Madison, who was delegated a lot of that responsibility, but overall, yes.
And did you have budgetary responsibility for ensuring that assets had appropriate and effective fire safety measures in place?
We had budgets that were set by the council. They were delegated to the TMO, and it was our responsibility to work within those budgets. If we needed more money, then that would be a discussion back with the council. It wasn't as such a TMO budget. It's a delegated budget from the council.
Now, can we just look at a practical example of a fire safety measure, and in particular the self-closing devices on flat entrance doors? If a resident called the customer service centre to report a broken self-closer, for example, the call to the customer service centre would come under your area of responsibility. Is that right?
Through Teresa Brown in the Housing Management Directorate, yes.
Now, a reactive repair to a self-closing device would then be requested through, for example, Repairs Direct.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Now, who within the TMO would be responsible for ensuring that the reactive repair had been carried out satisfactorily and in good time?
The reactive repairs were all the responsibility of Repairs Direct, and they had specific monitoring in place to provide oversight on the quality checking of all repairs. But what I would say is that that organisation was structured to do a percentage of checking. So it wouldn't be 100%. Most organisations in the sector recognise that that requires resources, so it was around 10 to 20% that we post-inspected on repairs, and that was sort of considered the general normal way to manage post-inspection of repairs.
And at any time, did the boards fix a specific percentage of repairs that had to be inspected for this sampling exercise at 10 or 20%?
It was around 10 to 20%, yes. From recollection, that was what was one of the key performance indicators.
But no percentage was ever fixed by the board?
I think it was. I think it was around 10 to 20% from my recollection, yes.
So not a specific figure, more of a range?
It's a percentage of the total number of repairs undertaken.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, at Repairs Direct, who had specific responsibility for ensuring that repairs were carried out? Did it lie with the managing director ultimately?
Yes, managing director, yes.
And would that mean, given your role on the board and your executive function, would it mean that ultimately that you were responsible for ensuring that systems were in place at Repairs Direct to ensure that repairs were carried out satisfactorily and in good time?
I think I would say that the board was responsible. The collective members of that company board, and we received reporting information to help us with our oversight of the performance of the company.
And would the same answer be given to the question as to who was responsible for monitoring performance of the systems to ensure that repairs were carried out satisfactorily?
Yes, I would say so, yes.
Okay. Now, can we now turn to the TMO's health and safety policy, and particularly that dated February 2016, which we looked at earlier. That's back at TMO 100244402. If we go back to the front page. Thank you. First of all, do you recognise this document, Ms Jevans?
Yes, I do, yes.
And if we can go back to paragraph 2.9 on page 3, and the various aspects of the responsibility of the Operations Directorate, and we see in the second bullet point at the end, the final phrase, and coordinating fire risk assessment actions. Now, if I can ask you to keep that phrase in mind and compare and contrast the list of responsibilities in an earlier edition of the policy from December 2012. Now, that 2012 policy can be found at TMO 1003177. There you go, you see the date in the bottom left-hand corner. And if I could ask us to go to page 3, and you see in the bottom half of the page the Operations Directorate's responsibilities set out at para 2.8, and you'll see in the second bullet point at the end, it deals only with asbestos, but the later version has the words and coordinating fire risk assessments included. Can you help us as to what the reason was for the addition of responsibility for coordinating fire risk assessments in the 2016 version?
Sorry, I can't recall any discussion around that. I think what I would say is that clearly there was a lot of work done on, at the Health and Safety Committee on fire risk management and the actions. And so it's possible that over time, between 2012 and 2016, we developed as an organisation and we're really focusing on that, as you would have seen from the committee minutes and focus. And so it's possible that that was felt that it should be identified as more as a priority in the 16 document and so, was missed in the 12 document.
And so certainly from 2016 onwards, would you agree that the Operations Directorate played a key role in ensuring FRA actions were implemented?
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Now, could I follow onto that topic, which is fire safety management and the implementation of FRA actions in more detail? Now, you were responsible for ensuring that FRA actions allocated to Operation Directorate were carried out in accordance with the timescales set by the fire risk assessor. Is that a fair and accurate summary?
I think that summarises. I had a broad role, so obviously I had a number of teams, but yes, through those teams we would be responsible for undertaking the completion of the FRA actions, yes.
And if we could look at the next level down in your directorate, was Mr Madison responsible for FRA actions allocated to assets and regeneration?
Yes, that's right.
And within that department, asset and regeneration contract management would be the responsibility of Alex Bosman.
That's right, yeah.
And in the A&R project department, the responsibility would lie with David Gibson, is that right?
David Gibson's capital programme, so anything relating to FRA actions on capital works is David Gibson.
And were any FRA actions allocated to your housing department?
Yes, there were.
Responsive repairs, who was responsible for ensuring FRA actions allocated to responsive repairs were carried out?
That was the Managing Director, Graham Webb.
Thank you. Now, what processes did you have in place to ensure that FRA actions were completed satisfactorily and in good time?
So we had a Health and Safety Committee, a Corporate Health and Safety Committee, and at that committee we had monitoring reports that set out the numbers of outstanding FRA actions in priority and laterally in age profile. So at that committee we'd regularly review our performance, and then obviously we within the individual teams they'd have a whole mechanism of much more detailed management reports and informations that flowed through the W2 system, which was our IT system that tracked every action that came out of an FRA into an individual team. So team level and individual level they would have the detailed action, and then at management level at the committee we would have the management reporting. And so given that I had quite a broad role across a number of teams, it would be at that committee that I really had oversight of how to track these actions. And we had, I believe, over 400 blocks with FRAs, that generates hundreds, at times thousands of actions. So it was through those mechanisms in management reporting.
And were you consistently satisfied with the robustness of those arrangements for tracking FRA actions?
I think that we were on a journey over a number of years at the TMO, and I think that started around 2013, from recollection, 2012-13. And I think we understood that we needed to make improvements, and we were constantly trying to do that. And so I had confidence in all the teams working really hard to try and make those improvements. But housing management does require that continuous effort and work, actually. And something like this, with high volumes of actions coming into a system with large numbers of staff, there will be points points where it needs improvement. So that was what we were doing over a number of years.
We'll come on to the detail of that as it developed from 2012 onwards. But would you accept that the fact of an outstanding action could itself mean risk to a particular resident whom it affected?
I do accept that, and I think that's why we wanted to make sure we understood the priority of each action, and really focus on high priority that would have a significant risk. And
So you focused on high priority.
I think you have to make judgments, and the focus on a high priority is to make sure that you mitigate any actions there.
And how were high priority actions identified? Did you, for example, rely solely upon the advice of the fire risk assessor, or did you take your own separate view of what constituted a high priority?
I think we took the advice of the fire risk assessor.
In all circumstances?
Yes, I think so. I think we saw him as the qualified person to make a judgment on what was a priority.
Would you feel yourself sufficiently experienced or competent to second guess the view of the fire risk assessor in relation to a priority?
Certainly not myself. I didn't have those technical expertise, and I would be expecting to get that advice absolutely from the fire risk assessor.
Would fire safety issues and in particular FRA actions be discussed at executive team meetings?
I think we did have conversations about the progress of FRAs at particular ET meetings, yeah.
Now, if we can start consideration of those minutes from April 2012, and if I could ask us to go to TMO 008999801. And here we see from the top an executive team meeting on the 2nd of April 2012, you're the second attendee identified at the top, together with Robert Black, Anthony Parks and Lynette Pemberton. Could we go to page 5, and in particular item 6? Now, that says this, and I invite you to read it. The notes, accident and incident reports from the meeting of 26th of January were noted. Problems with completing action from fire risk assessments to be resolved because of our liability if an action had not been completed in the event of a fire. Because of the current pressures on the Morrison contract, it was proposed that we get someone in to package the outstanding work and find someone to carry out the work who could be the same contractor who'd carried out the fire risk assessments. Costs could be covered by the repairs budget. Janice Ray would monitor progress, and Sacha Jevans would check current position on outstanding work with Andy Marshall. Now, it's plain from this minute, would you agree, that the TMO faced problems with FRA actions in 2012?
I think this is, from my recollection, this refers to a time with the Morrison contract. Sorry, are these minutes 2012?
Yes, 2nd of April 2012.
So we had a failing contractor, and we'd had a number of years of failing contractors, Connaught and then Morrison. And this led into how we came about to set up Repairs Direct. And so a failing contractor, Morrison, was in a 10-year contract. So to deal with that failure is quite a complex process in terms of getting out of a contract. It takes a number of months. And we went through that process. So therefore, during those months when a contractor knows that they're coming to the end or they won't have that 10-year commitment, their failure rate starts to increase, and this relates to that. So almost effectively a backlog of actions from that contract as we came out of one and went into the setup of Repairs Direct, you have that period where it's really difficult to manage. And I think this relates to a build-up of work. And our response here is to say that we're going to get someone in to package it up and clear that work.
So there was a backlog in April 2012 of FRAs, which you say was attributable to issues arising under the Morrison's contract. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, I think so, yes.
Now, can you help us with what, in brief form, what this scope of the Morrison contract was?
The Morrison contract was the responsive repairs service. So it's the same service that Repairs Direct covered. So responsive repairs and voids works.
So the backlog related to responsive repairs in April 2012?
Yes.
Now, it's clear that from this minute that in April 2012, the executive team were aware of a potential liability if an action had not been completed. Can you remember what particular liability you were most concerned about?
I can't recall. I can go by this minute, and I think what we're saying here is it's the number and the need to get them all closed and completed that is the issue that we're expressing here. And I think the response in terms of mitigating that risk is that we're going to get an additional resource in to package that up and get through this backlog as quickly as possible.
On the back of this minute, there's no indication that the work to remedy the backlog would be carried out on a priority basis. Would you accept that as a first reading of this minute?
I don't think that's minuted, but I think there would be an assumption that we would absolutely be trying to prioritise every single action that comes out of a fire risk assessment.
Okay. An unspoken priority?
Yes, absolutely, and I think that was understood across the organisation and Repairs Direct. We really knew that we had to work hard on this, and we're talking about high volumes in Repairs Direct. You know, nearly 30,000 repairs a year, a part of that being the FRAs. So it's a constant flow of high volume work.
Do you remember articulating at the time any concern that outstanding FRA actions may raise the risk to particular residents who are affected by that outstanding action?
I can't recall specific discussions at that time.
Do you recall anyone raising that concern about the heightened risk potentially to residents affected by the outstanding actions?
Not in the way you put it, but I think that we were trying really hard to make sure that we closed the actions as quickly as possible.
Would it be fair to say that that too was an unspoken concern?
Yes, I would say so, yeah.
With whom did Andy Marshall work at this time?
Andy Marshall was, this is before Repairs Direct, so he would have reported into myself.
Okay. And he later became the MD of Repairs Direct?
That's right, yes, yeah.
At this time, so April 2012, was he an employee of the TMO?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Now, the next document I'd like to take you to is the executive team minutes dated March 2013, and they can be found at TMO 1003105. And if I could ask you to go to page, there you go, just so you can familiarise yourself, if you go to page 5, the very bottom, there we go, we see performance. And if we could turn over the page to the very top of page 6, we see there under the heading Health and Safety / Fire Risk Assessments, it says this: Health and safety audit was due and fire risk assessments were a risk. There was a meeting on the 7th of March, which would be attended by Anthony Parks, Janice Ray and Peter Madison with Sacha Jevans. When these issues would be discussed, Peter Madison had put John Borrett in charge of any action from fire risk assessments. Part of the problem was the non-performance of the contractor, RG, in carrying out inspections. Ricky Sams had overall responsibility for the contract, and Janice Ray had been picking up any failures with them. Previously, when Mark Anderson raised performance concerns with them, there was a short-lived improvement. It was agreed that we would aim to carry out any outstanding fire risk assessment action before the audit, and then sort out accountability ownership of the work. A way forward was to consider what action we could take under the terms of the contract. Now, this minute is 11 months or so after the previous one we've discussed. Now, the reference to the audit was the forthcoming health and safety audit to be carried out by RBKC. Is that correct?
It could be, yes, yeah, I think so.
And it appears, would you agree, that there was a concern on the executive team that the audit might identify outstanding FRA actions. Is that correct?
From what this minute says, I think it's identifying that any fire risk actions outstanding is a risk, and that we should be trying to complete them as soon as possible. And I think that was always the focus here.
And the apparent intention was to clear the backlog and then decide who's going to do the work. Is that a fair summary from what is said there?
Yeah, I think so. But where you see the bullet point 3, accountability ownership, I think that is referring to the problems with RG and the debate between the client-contractor role. So I think that's what that refers to there.
Now, the audit by RBKC is mentioned again at an executive team meeting on the 20th of March 2013, so roughly a few weeks after this. Now, the minutes are at TMO 009000564. Thank you. There you go, you're third on the list of attendees. If I could ask to go to page 4, which concerns fire risk assessments. And under the heading, roughly halfway down the page, it says, a briefing was given on the meeting held with Janice Ray on the 7th of March. There had been an incident during the health and safety audit when the auditor had visited a block without a check being made beforehand that the firefighting equipment was compliant. These issues had been addressed at the meeting, and Peter Madison would also ensure that his team provided better support to the health and safety team. However, the auditors had focused on processes rather than this incident in their report. A fire risk assessment audit was coming up, and although we could show that these assessments had taken place, there was some confusion on whether the action had been followed up, as there was no clear signing off process. A list of 200 actions had been compiled, which were being checked with RGE to see which ones were still outstanding. Peter Madison thought that the people carrying out assessments should be able to order works direct, which would then be entered on a system for easier monitoring. The language being used in the assessments also needed to be clearer. It was proposed that the role of health and safety team be reviewed at a high level when Anthony Parkes was present. It was suggested that an external health check would help with this process. Another outstanding issue was asbestos management and safeguarding of staff from residents. Following discussion with Anthony Parkes, someone would be approached to carry out this review. Now, my first question is, it seems that the concern there was some concern that the auditor had been shown a block with out-of-date firefighting equipment. Is that correct?
Could you mind going back to the
Yes, of course.
page? Sorry, I lost a bit of track. Can I just read?
Yes, of course.
Sorry, your question again was?
The concern appeared to be that the auditor had been shown a block which had out-of-date firefighting equipment. Is that right?
Yes.
And that the auditor was more concerned with process in his report. Is that a fair reading of that minute?
Yes, for that minute, yes.
And we can also see that a separate fire risk assessment audit was proposed at that stage. Now, can you help us? Did that audit take place or not?
I can't recall that, I'm afraid. No, I'm sorry.
The reference there to the absence of a clear signing off process, can you remember whether that problem was resolved, and if so, how?
I think reading this minute, it's referring to the signing off process with RGE and the contractor and the problems that we're having there. I'm not sure. I'm not clear whether that's an organisation one or an RGE specific comment from the minutes.
And looking at the final paragraph on that page we're looking at the moment, where there's a reference to, quotes, the external health check, can you remember what the substance of that proposed health check was intended to be?
I'm not sure. This may have led into the Matt Hodson, the commissioning of the Matt Hodson report, if I've got the dates correct. Sorry, what's the date of this minute?
This minute is the 20th of March 2013.
Okay, so it may have been leading into the commission of Matt Hodson. And I think what we're saying here as the executive team is that if there are problems that we've come across, let's get an independent person in to really understand what those problems are as an organisation, so that we know what actions to put right and get some independent expert advice on that. That's what this minute, I believe, is saying.
Now, before we get to Mr. Hodgson, let's fill in a gap and look at the RBKC audit in 2013. And the final audit report is dated April 2013 and can be found at RBK 0000313. Excuse me. Now, we can see from the front page that you are the third individual on the circulation list, including also Janice Ray, Anthony Parks and Peter Madison. Why was it circulated to you four before Mr. Black and Laura Johnson?
I don't know. I don't know, actually. I assume the content of it for us to review, and then the final version circulated to Chief Executive Laura Johnson.
Can you remember why Mr. Madison was included on the circulation list?
Well, Peter Madison had an important role in the fire risk actions through his responsibility as Director of Assets and Regions. So I think, and it covered a broad area around fire safety. So I think that would be why.
Thank you. If we can turn to page 4 and paragraph 11. We see there that RBKC gave the TMO limited assurance and goes on to say, as a result of the audit review, internal audit can only give limited assurance that adequate controls and processes are in place for health and safety at the TMO. And if we can now turn back to page 3, excuse me, in this document, paragraph 7. It said this: a number of external contractors are used to carry out safety inspections and compliance checks for the TM. With regard to gas, electrical and fire safety, these contractors are overseen by the building services team, asset and regeneration, asbestos surveys and associated works are overseen by the health and safety team and the repairs manager. Now, your directorate was responsible for overseeing gas, electrical and fire safety external contractors that carried out those checks for the TMO, is that right?
Through Peter Madison's contract management team, yes.
For which you were ultimately responsible?
Yeah.
And if we could look over the page at paragraphs 9 and 10, it says this: areas were identified where controls can be improved. 3 high-priority recommendations were made as follows. Gas inspection records on Keystone Asset Management System should be up-to-date and regularly reviewed by management to ensure it reflects the most current status for TMO properties. The electrical inspection reports on Keystone System should be up-to-date and accurately reflect the inspections carried out by the electrical contractor. And all portable firefighting equipment should be regularly inspected by the appointed contractor, and any faulty equipment identified replaced on a prompt basis. And then turning to paragraph 10, 5 medium priority recommendations were also made as follows. First one, all high priority remedial work identified as part of the annual health and safety inspection checks should be followed up by the health and safety team to ensure it is undertaken on a prompt basis. The service agreement with the Gas Advisory Service should be reviewed and terminated if it's no longer required. And if we go to the final, the 5th one, appropriate performance indicators relating to health and safety inspections should be developed by management. Now, is it right to say that those recommendations, both high and medium priority ones, were primarily for assets and regeneration to consider?
Yes, yes, it is, yeah. I was looking for response to repairs, but no, they are mostly the areas covered by the contract management team.
Thank you. Now, the final medium priority recommendation was for appropriate performance indicators to be developed. Was that done?
Yes, it was. We had a quite a detailed suite of KPIs, and they were produced on a monthly basis, and they covered the whole organisation, and they had specific KPIs in the contract management team. So it was really important that that's where we measured our performance against gas, electrical, fire safety, lifts, for example, and most of the M&E contracts covered in the contract management team.
Now, you said in answer there that, I quote, we had quite a detailed suite of KPIs, close quotes. Did you or the health and safety team consider KPIs to measure, for example, fire safety or fire risk assessment completions at this point?
I think that was being measured through the Health and Safety Committee. So the suite of KPIs that I've just referred to was a monthly monitoring that went through Senior Management Team, Operations Committee and up to Executive Team. And that covered all of our services across the TMO, including the contract management services. I think the fire safety aspects were measured in more detail through the Health and Safety Committee. And that's where we developed the monitoring on the actions, how many outstanding, how many partially completed and how many due.
Now, bearing that in mind, can we now look at what is said about performance indicators at paragraphs 9.3 and 9.4, which can be found at page 21 within this document? 9.3 is at the top. It says their audit noted that only a limited number of health and safety performance indicators are reported, and there is an absence of meaningful indicators for areas such as electrical inspections, water quality inspections, treatment of asbestos. 9.4, in the absence of a full range of performance indicators for health and safety specific areas, there is a risk that management cannot monitor performance levels for these areas and take appropriate corrective action where poor or inadequate performance levels are identified. It then makes provision for a recommendation, which is appropriate performance indicators relating to health and safety inspections should be developed by management. This ensures that inspections can be monitored and any performance issues identified for appropriate corrective action to be taken where performance does not meet expectations. Then the management response is set out below. Quote, the annual report summarises all health and safety activity in the preceding 12 months. However, it had been acknowledged that it would be beneficial for the TMO to supplement this with meaningful health and safety key performance indicators, which could be monitored regularly throughout the year. A range of such indicators have now been identified, covering a range of areas, including health and safety inspections, fire risk assessments reviews, enforcement deficiency notices received, number of accidents, fires, violent incidents, percentage asbestos surveys completed, percentage Legionella risk assessments outstanding over 2 years old, percentage compliance on maintenance of fire equipment, wet and dry risers, fire extinguishers, fire alarm sprinklers, etc. Now, bearing in mind the detail of that response, who prepared the substance of that response?
I certainly think a vast amount of that was prepared by the Health and Safety team, Janice Ray, in preparation for the Health and Safety Committee. And some elements were part of the contract management team and our broader KPI reporting mechanism that I have just referred to in terms of our suite of KPIs.
Did you yourself contribute to that management response?
I can't recall specifically, I'm afraid.
Were you aware at this time that KPIs had been identified and recommended for health and safety inspections?
Yes, I think so. And actually, I was really keen to make sure the organisation had KPIs across all of the teams and specifically here. And I think the executive team were really concerned when they got this limited assurance report. And I certainly was. And I think there was a lot of work that went into trying to develop KPIs. And I would say that it wasn't something you can just do overnight. You know, you can't, first of all, particularly in the contract management team, there was an awful lot of work that we had to do on developing the Keystone database first before you can generate the data that comes out of it, to then generate the management reports to make sure that you're on top of things. So this is a process, and we had a lot of work to do with Keystone, which was the asset management database. So this management response did reflect how concerned we were and what we needed to do. But it was a significant piece of work, and I think Mr. Madden and his team took some time to work their way through that.
Now, bearing in mind the detail of that answer, were you aware that a suite of performance indicators which included fire safety were not introduced by the TMO until January 2016, so some 3 years after the date of this audit?
I can't recall the specific date, but there were some elements of this that were being reported sooner than that, I believe, from recollection. And as I said, I do think it was a journey. It was difficult. We had contractors that were underperforming that we needed to reprocure. Now that process, when you try to get rid of an underperforming contractor, that can take 6 months. Then you need to go into procurement, which takes 6 months, and then you need to mobilise a new contract. So that
Mr. Jevans,
process,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but what we have here is a situation in which you have said that management, the executive team, were concerned about the limited assurance rating. You've accepted that the existence of an outstanding FR action raises a risk for the individual resident who's affected by that outstanding action. 3 years was far too long in order to ensure that fire safety formed part of the KPIs, wasn't it?
I don't think that we weren't reporting during that 3 years. I think there were elements that we were reporting and we were building up to it, and we were all concerned, and that's what we were working towards, trying to get the systems in place to make sure we manage that. And where we identified high risk, we were trying to put in place interim mitigating measures.
Well, we'll come on to those measures earlier on and see what happened during the course of this 3 years. But can we look at the follow-up to the audit that was carried out in December 2013? And if we can go to RBK 0000320. There we go, that's the front page. Initially circulated to Peter Madison, Janice Ray and Alex Bosman, and then finally circulated also to you and Anthony Parks. Was it first circulated to Mr. Madison and Mr. Bosman because the earlier recommendations were to be carried out by Asset and Regeneration?
I can't recall, but I assume so.
Now, if we turn over to the second page, we can see that matters have now progressed, and that in paragraph 5, the Council was able to provide a satisfactory assurance, which is defined as, whilst there is basically sound system, there are some weaknesses and or omissions which put some of the system unit processes, etc., objective at risk. Now, can we look at what action is stated to have taken place with respect to the KPIs we've just looked at? And that discussion can be found at page 9, and in particular item 8.14 in the table. And we see there the recommendation, appropriate performance indicators set out, reading left to right, agreed action, a range of KPIs which will be monitored regularly, implementation date September 2013, so some 3 months previously, and the action has implemented. And if we just look at what has been implemented, we can see in the far right column, gas safety inspections, water quality risk assessments, water quality inspection and servicing, domestic electrical testing, and fire protection. And we go over the page, equipment checks. And it says KPIs are reported at both the Health and Safety Operational Committee meetings. The most recent report that went to the October 2013 meeting was provided as evidence of this protocol. Now, that list of action does not include health and safety inspections, does it, as being subject to a KPI?
When you say health and safety inspections?
If you go back to, well,
yeah,
I can take you back to the April audit, which identified health and safety inspections as being recommended as the subject of a KPI. Now, if we turn over the page back to page 9, can you see health and safety inspections identified there as being the subject of a KPI?
I think I'm not sure about the minute here or the drafting here, because health and safety inspection feels like a broad KPI. I think you need to narrow that down to either an estate services inspection, which was undertaken by caretakers, or a fire risk assessment.
Well, let's narrow it down to fire. Sorry, let's narrow it down to.
I'm not quite sure that's yeah.
Well, let's narrow it down to fire risk assessments and reviews, which was recommended in April 2013. That is not identified there, is it, as an action taken?
So you have the fire risk assessment programme, you have the actions generated out of it, and you have premises risk assessments carried out by the health and safety team, and you also have health and safety inspections by the estate services caretaking team. So there's 4 areas there that I think you could broadly group under health and safety inspections.
My question was a simple one, Ms Jevans. Would you agree that fire risk assessments reviews are not identified in that list of actions that had been taken in response to the April 2013 audit's recommendations?
Not in that list there, no. I think the one relating to it is the fire protection.
Equipment?
Yeah.
Why? But fire risk assessment is broader than simply fire protection equipment.
It is, but I don't think it's been specific in the recommendation, you see. That's how I'm seeing this, that because it's relating to health and safety inspections in the narrative in the recommendation column of 8.14, that really should be more specific to what we mean by that. And so what you could say is that the implementation and the evidence provided, there are elements of health and safety in there. So gas safety is an element of that, fire protection is an element of that. I think the recommendation would need to be more specific, but I recognise that fire risk assessment programme is not listed in that implementation column.
Quite. And fire risk assessment reviews were identified specifically as in the management response to the April 2013 audit that should have been the subject of a KPI, and it's not referred to there, is it? Would you like to go back to the April 2013 audit which set out the management response?
Yes, please, yeah.
Let's go back to that, which can be found at RBK 000 313 and page 21. And I don't know whether the document manager will allow us to have the management response on one screen and the December audit response on another page that we've just been looking at, the RBK 000 313. Anyway, you'll see there, if you read through,
Yeah,
there we go, thank you.
yeah.
A range of such indicators now been identified covering a range of areas, including health and safety inspections. Now let's just take it through one by one. Are health and safety inspections, yes or no, identified in the implemented actions in the document on the right-hand side?
No, they're not. But what I would say is that this area is in relation to the health and safety team specifically, not necessarily the operations directorate.
Yes, but the response on the right-hand side is not limited to the operations directorate. It's in relation to the TMO, generally.
Yes, I understand that, yes.
Fire risk assessments and reviews, are they mentioned in the document on the right-hand side,
No.
yes or no?
No.
Enforcement deficiency notices received, are they referred
No.
to, yes or no?
No.
Fires, the number of fires, are they referred to, yes or no?
No.
Percentage compliance on maintenance of fire equipment specifically, is that mentioned, or would you say it's caught by the final bullet point?
I think that's caught by the final bullet point, yes.
Now, can you give the panel an explanation as to why enforcement deficiency notice were not identified as the subject of a specific KPI?
I can't, and what I would say is that this is the area of responsibility of Anthony Parks at the time, who managed Janice Ray, and it was his responsibility to cover health and safety, and so this would have been his area of responsibility in terms of the management response to the audit.
But bearing in mind your executive responsibility and given the limited assurance rating related to a number of activities that were subject for your directorate, wouldn't you have had a concern to ensure that the implementation of remedial action covered everything that needs to be covered?
Yes, and I understand that, and I did take my executive role responsibly, and I was focusing on the works of the contract management team that were in my directorate, and that covers those elements in the bullet points in the implementation. And actually the bits that you're reading out around the health and safety inspections, the FRA reviews and the enforcement deficiency notices was the responsibility of Anthony Parks, and he would have inputted into that.
Now, can we look at a report prepared by Mr. Parks following the April audit, and that's dated the 25th of July 2013, and that can be found at TMO 00873 392. And if we look at paragraphs 2.2 and 2.3, in March-April, RBKC undertook an internal audit assignment with the brief to assess and evaluate the controls in the TMO management of health and safety. 2.3, the audit provided limited assurance and medium risk. The main areas of risk were considered to be the delay in putting information onto Keystone and the management of the contractors. The service objectives, guidance procedures, compliance with corporate health and safety guidelines and routine inspections were all found to be satisfactory. Now, the issues flagged up by Mr. Parks were said to be performance issues. Would you agree with that?
Sorry, which paragraph is that?
Paragraph 2.3.
Yeah.
Do you agree that the issues flagged up by Mr. Parks were performance issues?
I think what he's saying here is the information onto the Keystone Asset Management System and the management of contractors.
Performance issues.
Well, they're all performance issues, yeah, and they are all the elements that we knew about and that we were working hard to address. Yes.
Now let's turn over the page to paragraph 3.2. And if we can expand that, a health and safety consultant, Matt Hodgson, has been appointed to carry out a review of health and safety within the organisation. Using an industry standard HSG 65 audit, this audit methodology breaks down the health and safety management into 5 categories: policy, organising, planning and implementing, measuring performance, audit and reviewing performance. The initial report on the audit is expected by the end of July. An action plan will follow from the audit and will ensure that the TMO meets the legislative and best practice requirements and embeds health and safety into the culture of the organisation. In addition, Mr. Hodgson will advise on the recruitment and remit of the Health and Safety Officer for Repairs Direct. Now, was Mr. Hodgson engaged because of the limited assurance mark given by the RBKC audit?
Yes, I think I mentioned this earlier. I think the executive team had the limited insurance. We were really concerned and felt it was appropriate to get an external consultant to come and really review what was the issues and help us to get an action plan to really put this right. And that's what Matt Hodgson was there to do.
Now, in March 2013, the coroner's report into the Lacknell House fire was published, and the coroner's recommendations were addressed in a report to the TMO Operations Committee on the 2nd of May 2013. And if we can go to that document, which is TMO 100311056. Now, that was, as you can see from the top, prepared by Janice Ray, entitled Current TMO Position on Fire Risk Assessments. Do you remember seeing that report, Ms. Jevans?
It's such a long time ago. I can't recall.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Don't worry. Let's look at paragraph 5.3, which is on page 3. And I'll read it out, but I invite you to read it as well. Whilst many actions have been progressed, it's fair to say that a significant number of items remain outstanding and have not been progressed as swiftly as required. Therefore, all outstanding items have now been collated and presented to the relevant team for urgent completion. The requirement to give this work priority has now been reiterated to the entire organisation, and completion of these is being monitored on a weekly basis, and the executive team regularly provided with a detailed breakdown on progress. 5.4 says the need to implement a process to facilitate better monitoring of FRA actions, and in particular to identify where these remain outstanding, has been highlighted. Therefore, the possibility of a workflow system on the electronic document and record management system has been investigated and trialled, and it is anticipated that following stakeholder training, this can be implemented from late May, early June 2013. This will ensure a demonstrable audit trail is in place and should ensure that these are treated with priority. Now, were you provided with detailed breakdowns of progress?
At this point?
Yes. So May 2013, if you can remember the position there.
I can't remember specifically. So any detail will have gone through the Health and Safety Committee from my recollection.
Was the can you remember, sorry to press you on this, but did the executive team receive any update on action about clearing the backlog?
I'm sure they would have done. I can't specifically recall. And what this is saying here is that we are putting in place a process to make sure that we are able to report that back to the executive team. We would what we were working on was getting the management information in a way that we could have oversight as a executive team on the performance of this area of work. Yeah. And that was challenging, and that's what we had to work through by putting in place the W2 workflow system.
And that's the workflow system that was put in place?
Yes, because otherwise you've just got hundreds of actions that are very detailed. As managers, in my directorate I had over 40 managers. There would be 5 teams that would all have actions at any point in time in the week. So the only way to manage this as you go up through the management structure is to have the right management information. But you can't get that until you've got your baseline IT system working, and that was what W2 sought to do.
And once you had
that information.
And once you had that baseline information in place, how did you monitor work on clearing the backlog?
Well, that was where that came through the Health and Safety Committee, and we understood how many actions were partially outstanding, completed, or fully completed. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, can we look at the Hodgson report that Anthony Parks mentioned? It's dated July 2013, and it can be found at TMO 1003124. There we go. Now, you were interviewed by Mr. Hodgson as part of this process. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, I think so, yes. And
if we could turn to the final paragraph on it's TMO 1003124/8. Thank you. And it's the paragraph that starts with the words, the governance of health and safety. And it says this: the governance of health and safety requires a serious review, as the responsibility for different risk areas sit within different departments, and not because the decision was made at committee, but more through default. Due to the shortfall in compliance data sent up to the exec committee, there is a lack of focus and leadership in making the important changes or decisions to manage risk effectively. This issue is not helped by a breakdown in communication between the health and safety and other departments specifically in relation to the completion of actions as raised in statutory reports. The business needs to decide who has the authority to enforce this process. Health and safety roles and responsibilities in job descriptions and in the health and safety policy do not match expectation of some directors involved in compliance management. Now, would you agree that responsibility for different risk areas sitting within different departments frustrates a holistic assessment of risk affecting the business?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question.
If responsibility sits across different departments, that prevents a holistic, someone taking a comprehensive view of the nature and extent of the risk affecting a business. Do you agree with that proposition?
I think that in my whole experience of 25 years of working in housing management, it's complex. There's a number of teams and their responsibilities spread across lots of different teams. And so the challenge for directors and senior management is how you get that oversight, and then that you can actually enforce or encourage your staff to be accountable for their individual role in that process. So it's a whole corporate approach that has to be coordinated, and it creates focus and commitment, and it creates the right management structures. And I think that's what we were always seeking to do.
Now, it says here that the executive committee were lacking compliance data. Can you remember what was missing? Or thought to be missing, I should say.
I can't remember specifically at this time, but I think this was the start. This was the recognition of the limited assurance. Matt Hodgson had identified the problems, and then we were on the action plan to make sure that any shortfalls and gaps were filled. And I think this is part of it. The specifics I can't recall from this. And what I would say is that this particular action plan was led by Anthony Parks.
Now, it refers there to a breakdown in communication between health and safety and other departments. Did that accord with your view at the time?
I think there were gaps, and I think that's why we had to have that focus. And
if I can stop you there, what were the gaps?
I think it was the link between the health and safety, which were advising on policy, strategy, training in Janice Ray's team, and creating that link into the operational teams, and also the monitoring and tracking. And I know that I had conversations with Anthony Parks about that and how he could support Janice Ray in making sure that the health and safety team was more connected to the operations directorate. And I was specific about that.
Now, it mentions there that someone had to be responsible for enforcing the process. First question is, did you agree with that assessment at the time?
I think when you've got you've got structures and teams across the organisation, at some point there needs to be some level of accountability, and I understood that at the time to be the executive director responsible for the health and safety function.
So not you, again, Mr.
No.
Parks is what you'd say,
Yeah.
and then later Barbara Matthews.
Yeah.
And was the health and safety executive director specifically allocated authority to enforce the process? Can you remember?
I'm not sure, but I would see that as a given within their role at that level.
Do you remember any decision by the executive team or the TMO board fixing the health and safety executive director with that responsibility?
I think the chief exec very clearly gave that responsibility to Anthony Parks and later Barbara Matthews, and I think that was clear to the board and the executive team.
How did he make that clear?
Well, we'd have that discussion in executive team, and it was clearly part of the portfolio and the portfolio of that executive director.
And so, am I understanding your evidence correctly, that it was responsibility for enforcement of compliance with actions going forward within the operations directorate still lay with you, though?
I think the actions and the operational work is what my teams were there and had responsibility for, yes.
So it wasn't solely a question of health and safety. You too still had a role, didn't you?
Yes, absolutely. I think everybody in the organisation had a role in terms of health and safety, and we understood that, and we were working hard to make that happen.
Now, if we can turn over the page. Thank you. This is the start of 39 recommendations, or rather 39 issues that Mr. Hodgson identified as needing redress. And if we look at the second one, which is set out on the left-hand side and states, take action to resolve the significant volume outstanding actions unresolved in statutory reports, especially in relation to fire risk assessments. Once the backlog has been brought under control, establish a process to monitor and track completion of report actions as matched against priorities identified in the reports. And that's given a priority level 1. And a time is given 3 months to resolve the backlog of actions. Now, was the backlog resolved within 3 months, yes or no?
I don't recall. I don't know what the number was and what it was at the beginning and what it was at the end of the 3 months. So it's a bit hard to tell from this.
Okay. Now, if we can look at recommendation 5. Establish an appropriate training matrix for the business. Ensure that this includes sessions for health and safety duties of senior execs. Establish a process for running the sessions and keeping appropriate personnel records. Priority 1. And then the immediate response is stated to be 1 month to establish the training matrix and 6 months to phase in the outstanding courses and sessions. Was the training matrix set up?
I'm assuming so. This would have been an area of responsibility for the Director of People and Performance, Yvonne Birch, who had responsibility for corporate training across the organisation, and she would have included the expertise on the content from the health and safety team, but effectively training was really through Yvonne Birch, the Director of People and Performance. So I'm not sure I can comment on this.
Well, let's put it slightly differently. In your position as an executive director, did you receive any training following this report? I think your answer is yes.
Yeah, I was taking the first point about the training matrix for the business. But yes, in terms of senior execs, we all went on training that Matt Hodgson arranged, which I referred to earlier. Yes, we did do that.
Now, can we look still within this document? It's internal page 32, but the URN page is 33. And this deals specifically with the issue of fire risk assessments. And if we could look at the third paragraph on that page, the one that starts with the word Keystone. It says Keystone is not up to date with FRA reports, so it's not possible to assess how compliant the business is with regards current FRA reports. One issue that is known and can be measured is the volume of outstanding FRA actions created in the reports held. The FRA report actions get pushed out to one of three locations: assets and regeneration, neighbourhood and repairs. There are currently somewhere between 900 to 1,000 outstanding FRA actions. Janice Ray has established a spreadsheet showing departmental progress and hosts meetings to discuss progress. Matt Hodgson said that report actions get, quotes, pushed out, close quotes, to three locations. First of all, asset regeneration. Secondly, neighbourhood. And finally, repairs. Would you agree that each of those locations is within your directorate?
Yes, and there was also supported housing as well that's missing.
And that was within your directorate as well?
Yeah.
And so you have responsibility for enforcing compliance with completion of actions, is that right?
I had responsibility, and I delegated a lot of that down through the teams, as you'd expect, in a role of my nature, of my size and breadth. So I had the Director of Assets and Regen, Director of Housing, and Managing Director Graham Webb, and Supported Housing Manager. And my expectation was that they would have a responsibility within their teams to complete those FRA actions.
And how did you monitor compliance given the extent of delegation? Taking it stage by stage, when did W2 come online so you could use that as a monitoring tool?
I can't be sure, but I think it was slightly later than 2013. So we were monitoring them through the Health and Safety Committee. I also had my operational management team meetings, which were the directors that I've just explained. So I would be having discussions with them. I'd have individual one-to-one discussions with them. There was a focus. We knew that we needed to get these outstanding actions. So it would have been individual discussions, my operational management team and the Health and Safety Committee.
And am I right in thinking that up until about mid-2015, you chaired the Operations Health and Safety Committee?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
And did you consider that to be an effective forum in which to monitor effective and timely completion of outstanding FRA actions?
I think we had the right people at that meeting, the right level of seniority, and there was a significant focus on it. So yes, I do consider that the right structure within our organisation.
Did you consider it to be effective in getting the job done, i.e. reducing the backlog?
I think things, in a perfect world, you'd have zero, and I just think that was very challenging. And in my experience, in my 25 years experience in the housing sector, this is a challenge for everyone to get that work down, and it's a constant flow of actions that come through. And I think we had a lot of discussion about the areas that we could improve on, and I think that was important.
Flowing from that, can we now go to look at minutes for an executive team meeting from August 2013, and they're at TMO 00899807. And if we can look at paragraph 1.4 at the very bottom, which goes over to the next page, Health and Safety Report. Although there was a lot of operational action in the report, it did not help us with the organisational structure management. So it flows on from the point you just made. Peter Madison was concerned that the fire risk assessments were substandard and could put the organisation at risk. There was also some concern that high-risk blocks were being classified as low risk and vice versa. However, the fire brigade had approved our processes, but there was concern that A&R, asset regeneration, were being bogged down with actions which were not addressing the situation. It was agreed to set up a meeting with Matt Hodgson, Peter Madison, and Janice Ray to discuss the way forward. Peter had suggested he take on responsibility for all areas, including asbestos and fire risk, which was still with Janice Ray, and Janice Ray would have a more strategic role and work with the fire brigade. The possibility of Adrian Bowman transferring to A&R to be considered so that Peter Madison could resource this area of work. Governance would be the reorganised Health and Safety Committee, and also the A&R Health and Safety Group, which Sacha Jevans would review and chair herself. Matt Hodgson's report to reflect this structure, any actions from the A&R Group to be referred to the Health and Safety Committee or executive team. Did you inform, was it you who informed the executive team about Peter Madison's concerns? Can you remember?
Oh, sorry, what are these minutes of which meeting are these?
Executive team meeting, August 2013.
I can't, I'm sorry, I can't recall.
Okay. Can you recall the detail of Mr. Madison's concerns?
Yes, I can. I think that what was happening is that the fire risk assessor was generating actions that almost duplicated, and so it was really difficult for Peter Madison's team to close down these actions effectively. And I'll give an example. The fire risk assessor would go out and look at a flat front entrance door, and rather than make and then the action from that to Peter's team would be go and inspect to make sure this is a 30-minute fire flat entrance door. And he's the fire risk assessor and the expert, and he's looking at the door. So make that judgment there and then as the fire risk assessor expert. Don't come back and create an action for someone in Pete's contract management team to then go out and check the door. So that was an example. And then another example would be that Carl Stokes would say that he needs to check the electrical certification on a communal piece of plant. And so actually, if he had access directly to our Keystone data where you can view the certification, that could just be closed off as an action there and then. So some of it was quite administrative, these actions. They were very much about checking whether certification was there. So where you see those numbers increasing, it's relating more to administration a lot of the time, or the way in which those actions were organised. And so Peter Madison was right to try to challenge those processes, and that was part of what I explained earlier in our journey to try to streamline this process.
Understood. Now, can you remember what Mr. Madison's reasons were for saying that the FRAs themselves were substandard, to quote?
I can't recall that, no.
Why? Can you remember why Mr. Madison considered that the substandard FRAs would, quotes, put the organisation at risk, close quotes?
No, I can't say that, and I can only assume that he was thinking about the actions that flowed from that in terms of the numbers that it was generating, and that in itself creates a risk.
Did the executive team act on Peter Madison's recommendation that he take on all responsibility for all areas, including fire risk?
No, that was it was agreed that would keep separate, and that would be undertaken through the health and safety team underneath Anthony Parks.
And why did the executive team reach that conclusion?
I think the chief exec particularly felt that there should be a separation between fire risk, health and safety, and the operations team, and that function should be kept separate.
Can we look at the document which sets out the actions from this meeting, which can be found at TMO 009000485? And item 1.4 is addressed midway down that first page, and it states, there you can see it, health and safety report, initial report has been received from Matt Hodgson, and a meeting would be arranged with him, which would be attended by Anthony Parks, yourself, Janice Ray, and Peter Madison. Did the meeting happen, can you remember?
I can't. Is this what minutes are these ET?
Yeah, this is the summary of actions arising from the meeting held on the 7th of August.
I'm sure it did, but I can't specifically recall it.
And do I take it from that you can't recall what was decided at any such meeting?
I can't recall the meeting, I'm afraid.
Could we now turn to the Operational Health and Safety Committee meeting following publication of the Hodgson report, and that was on the 12th of September 2013, and the minutes can be found at TMO 1003604. And there we go, you're the first on the list of attendees. And if we look at the introduction section, it says this: the purpose of the meeting is to review the current health and safety procedures and enhance current processes, ensuring the correct members within the organisation have the appropriate management strategies and the necessary resources in place to meet compliancy. Am I safe in assuming that that review was initiated, triggered by the Hodgson report?
Yes.
Now, if we can look at paragraph 2.2, which is at the bottom of the third page of this, and JW, that's Janice Ray, explained she felt much of the health and safety approach was reactive and responsive rather than proactive, and was in line with budgetary implications, and felt there was no assurance that agreed actions were being met going forward, i.e. void standards, fire stopping, and felt processes need to be put in place to confirm things are effectively progressed and concluded. Would you agree with her assessment that the health and safety approach was reactive and responsive?
I'm not sure I entirely agree with that, but I do know that this was at the point in time where we knew we needed to make improvements.
Did you agree with it at the time? I should have asked you a more precise question. I apologise.
Yes, I think you can see from this minute that we needed to do work to improve things.
Now, looking at that phrase, in line with budgetary implications, was the absence of sufficient funds an obstacle to the efficient and effective closing down of FRA actions?
No.
Could you help us, the panel, as to what was meant by the phrase in line with budgetary implications in this minute?
Can you just go back to the
course.
previous paragraph, sorry? I'm not sure I understand the minute, I'm afraid. I would say that the budget was never an issue around, it's never a blocker, it was never stopping us from completing anything to do with health and safety. Safe to say, if there was a large capital programme, for example, that wasn't something that was planned into our budget and that was over and above what we had in our service plan or capital programme, then that would be a different matter to be approved by RBKC. But in terms of our responses to all of this reactive work that come out of fire risk assessments, but budget was not the problem or issue.
So if it wasn't cost, can you help us as to what Janice Ray said at the time was meant by in line with budgetary implications?
I don't think I understand the minute. I understand the first part about reactive and responsive rather than proactive, which I think she's referring to having a more planned approach rather than just reacting.
Now, if we can now go to a separate set of minutes, and that's for the executive team.
Mr. Kinnear, I'm just wondering whether we're reaching a convenient point.
It's as good as any, sir.
Well,
I can wait for the next question after the break, sir.
are you sure?
I am.
All right. As Jevans, you probably know, we have a break during each half-day session, and we're going to take it now.
Okay.
So we'll break now. We'll resume, please, at 20 to 12.
Yeah.
And I have to ask you, as I have everyone else, please don't talk to anyone else about your evidence or anything relating to it while you're out of the room.
Okay.
Is that right?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'd like to
Thank
go
you.
to the usher, please. Thank you. 20 to 12.
Thanks, sir.
Yes, would you ask Ms Jevans to come back in, please? All right, Ms Jevans?
Yeah.
Right, ready to carry on?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Ms Jevans, could I ask you to turn to some executive team minutes, 18th of September 2013, can be found at TMO 00849798. And if we could turn to page 2, and item 2, assets and regeneration. And that's just to fix you in the minute. And then if we could turn to page 6. And it's the second bullet point from the top, which says clienting of fire risk assessments had been taken over by A&R, which were due to be completed by mid-October. First of all, what was meant by A&R taking over, quotes, the clienting, close quotes, of FRAs?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure on this point. My understanding of A&R was always about completing the fire risk actions, not clienting the fire risk assessment process itself.
And can you remember whether there was any transfer of responsibility for clienting to A&R at about this time? So we're talking September 2013.
No, the A&R team never had responsibility for the fire risk assessment programme, only over the actions. I don't know if clienting is the wrong word for the minutes, but certainly they never took on responsibility for that.
Okay. What exactly does clienting mean in this context?
My understanding of the word clienting is the oversight of a programme or a contractor and the monitoring of that. And so I'm very clear that A&R was never had the responsibility of the work with Carl Stokes and the fire risk assessment programme that always sat with the health and safety team.
And particularly Janice
Yes,
Ray.
thank you.
Yes.
Could we move forward then to minutes of the operational health and safety meeting on the 17th of January 2014? And they can be found at TMO 00840384. And if we could look at the fourth bullet point on that first page, the one which starts the fire brigade. And the fire brigade haven't come back with dates for visiting. They've said they are interested in seeing the W2 workflow process, so that's the process we were talking about earlier, looking particularly at any outstanding FRA actions which relate to compartmentation. Janice has been asked to talk to Michael about the information they will be shown, as they will be looking to make sure that we are completing the actions, which means they will be looking at things in more detail. And if we can go to the next paragraph, which starts at the moment. It says, at the moment, we're working from fire risk assessment reports and have until June to complete all actions. Michael suggested that the fire brigade be advised of the volume of outstanding FRA actions. However, consensus of the group was that this would result in more scrutiny from the LFB and also possible enforcement action, so agreed that we would not disclose this level of detail at this stage. JRP have reported back and have put the actions into programmes of works for Alex's team. Michael will look at these programmes and see how these can be best progressed in order to see the LFB's timescale. Michael said it would take him about 2 weeks to go through everything, so he'd give an update at the next meeting. Now, Michael, is that Michael Lyons?
Yes.
And what was his role at this time? So it's January 2014.
Michael Lyons was recruited as a health and safety manager for the operations team. So his area of responsibility covered support to the A&R team as well as our repairs, responsive repairs.
Now, we saw that Michael Lyons' suggestion about informing the LFB about FRAs and progress, it's fair to say that that suggestion didn't find favour. Would you agree with that?
I can't recall the discussion from this minute. Yes.
The stated reason was that it would increase the LFB's scrutiny of the TMO's FRA performance. That seems to be a fair reading of the minute. Would you agree?
Yes.
And that might lead to possible enforcement action. Would you agree with that?
I'm not sure about that, actually.
Well, it says so in the minute.
It says so in the minute, but I'm not sure it would have led to enforcement action or not. I think that would have been a matter for Janice to advise on.
Well, can we take it from here that you didn't correct that minute later? So can we assume that you accepted that observation as correct at the time, absent a correction?
Absent of correction, yeah.
Didn't those comments tell you, or indeed any other member of the executive team, something about the state of the FRA issue, as the TMO was clearly conscious that enforcement action might be in prospect?
And I think from this group, which met monthly, we absolutely understood that, and we were trying to do a number of different measures to get these actions completed.
Given that, why would you not take the transparent route with the LFB as being the enforcing authority under the RRO?
I can see how you would read it that way, and I can't particularly recall this discussion at the time, but what I would say is that there was an absolute focus on trying to get the actions complete.
Can we now turn to the Operational Health and Safety Committee meeting on the 12th of May 2015? So that's 16 months or thereabouts from this minute, and that can be found at TMO 1000947. Now, you gave your apologies there, you see, first identified. We look at item 1.2 under FRA stats, and it's recorded that JW, so Janice Ray, distributed the FRA action stats and confirmed that she had sent a breakdown to each team of the actions allocated to them. Still a significant number of actions outstanding for contract management and also repairs direct. And then if we can go to item 5 on page 5, then we see there at 5.1, SJ, so you, had previously asked for a more detailed breakdown of high-risk cases, so Janice Ray had provided a breakdown of responsive and contract management actions, definition of priority, timescales, and breakdown of categories for each team. Now, my first question is, when did you first ask for that detail? Would it have been about this time, so May 2015?
It appears so from this minute, but I think we would have had discussions before that time, from my recollection.
And apologies if this is a question directed to the obvious, but why was it important to have a breakdown of high-risk cases?
I think I explained this earlier. To manage such a large number of actions, it's really important to make sure you focus on the high risk as a priority. And I think that's what we were trying to do, to understand the categories across hundreds of actions.
Now, Barbara Matthews joined the TMO in June 2015 in succession to Anthony Parks, is that right?
Yes, that's right, yes.
And so she then assumed responsibility for ensuring FRA actions were closed down in accordance with the prescribed timetable?
Yes, in her role as Health and Safety Director, yes.
Now, did you retain any responsibility in that regard for actions that came within the remit of the Operations Directorate?
In terms of all the actions that were generated to the operations team, I had responsibility for that. Barbara Matthews had the overall responsibility for health and safety.
Thank you. Now, if we now turn to the TMO Corporate Health and Safety Committee meeting minutes on the 29th of September 2015, can be found at TMO 100111359. And I see you're present, first one on the list of attendees. And if we can turn to item 3 at the bottom of page 2, which again dealt with fire safety and risk assessment. And if we turn over the page at item 3.3, following is minuted at item 3.3. Paul, who was Paul?
I think Paul is Paul Jevans from Repairs Direct, who was the interim MD.
Thank you. That answers my next question. And it says that Janice Ray, that RD going through the responsive FRA actions, he should be able to confirm the programme and timescale within the next couple of weeks. AB will discuss with Paul Jevans. Did you retain a management function over Paul Jevans as the Executive Operations Director within the TMO?
I can't remember whether... I think Paul Jevans was in the new Repairs Direct structure. Yes, he is. And so that would have been the board structure that I explained earlier, that had oversight of the interim managing director.
And we'll come on to the dotted line organogram in due
Yeah.
course. Now, it's recorded there that AB will discuss with Paul Gervaux. Can you help us? Why was Alex Bosman, who was head of contracts management, why was he dealing with Repairs Direct in this regard?
I can't recall specifically. Maybe there was a crossover because before we set up Repairs Direct, or at the beginning of Repairs Direct, Peter Madison's team undertook a clienting role of Repairs Direct, and so this will be in relation to that.
Okay. Now, can we move on to the 11th of November 2015 to a meeting of the executive team, and the minutes can be found at TMO 00843593. Just before we come on to this, just flowing from your last answer, can you help us as to when the clienting role that Alex Bosman may have exercised came to an end? Can you remember?
I think it's when Graham Webb was recruited as managing director.
And can you help us as to when that was?
2015.
Thank you. Apologies. Going back to this executive team meeting on the 11th of November 2015, you're there, fourth one on the list of attendees. And if we can go to item 3 at the bottom of page 2. And we see there the penultimate paragraph. Sacha, that's you, noted that she has asked Gillian Kennedy to put together a spreadsheet detailing all outstanding FRA actions. There is a health and safety audit in early December, so that'd be 2015, and Sacha and Barbara are working together to clear the jams so that we can be compliant. Can you remember what precisely was discussed about FRA outstanding actions at this meeting?
No, I'm sorry, I can't know.
What was Gillian Kennedy's role in relation to outstanding FRA actions?
Gillian Kennedy was PA assistant, so it was an administrative function that she would have been undertaking for Barbara and myself.
What did you and Barbara Matthews do to clear the jam before the prospective audit?
I think this continues with the general approach of trying to identify where the backlog is, what's caused that problem, and trying to clear it.
Was the executive team forum the principal means by which Robert Black was kept informed of the state of progress in relation to outstanding FRA actions?
Yes, I would say so, yes.
Do you know of any other organisational forum in which he was kept updated?
There was also the Risk and Audit Committee, where health and safety reports went to, which is part of the board structure.
Okay, thank you. The next TMO Health and Safety minutes I'd like to take you to are those dated the 19th of January 2016, and they can be found at TMO 100-12174. There we go, thank you. And just looking at 1.1, Graham was welcome to the group, so that'd be Graham Webb. So the date of this is January 2016. So it seems that Mr. Webb started in January 2016.
I think that was his first health and safety meeting. I believe he was recruited at the end of 2015, but yeah.
Now, from January 2016 onwards, it appears that someone from Repairs Direct, whether it was Graham Webb or Alan Brooks or Shannon McInnes or indeed Derek Singleton, would attend the TMO Health and Safety Committee meeting. Why was that?
I can't recall exactly, but I think Barbara had reshaped this committee, and I think she probably felt that we needed a broader representation of some of the key areas where some of the sort of main problems were, which is Repairs Direct.
Now, can we turn to page 4 of this minute and items 3.1 and 3.2? So 3.1 is under the subheading WT Workflow FRA Actions. It says JW and BM, so Janice Ray and Barbara Matthews, highlighted the main points of the FRA summaries. In particular, it was emphasised that significant progress had been made with completing the backlog of outstanding actions by contract management and by Repairs Direct. Item 3.2, PM asked for a copy of the detail behind this report. PM noted that the system should be more robust to ensure actions are escalated if they are out of time or allocated to staff who are no longer with the organisation. Graham Webb advised the process will be reviewed to avoid outstanding historic actions. Can you remember now what detail Peter Maddison was after?
I can't remember the detail, but his point here is to make sure that managers within the organisation are able to understand what the problem is with their particular staff and their teams. So I think that's the issue. But the detail, I'm sorry, I can't recall.
And did you agree at the time with his view that the system needed to be more robust to ensure escalation where necessary and appropriate?
I can't recall the discussion at the time, I'm afraid.
Can you remember whether there was a problem at the time that actions would be allocated to staff who had left the TMO?
I don't recall that at all.
And you don't recall any concerns, broader concerns, that the system wasn't picking up allocation to departed staff?
I can't recall that, I'm afraid.
Can you remember now what precisely was done to remedy the deficiency identified by Mr. Maddison?
Well, I think this was Mr. Maddison's view that needed to have more of an aged profile analysis that would give enough early warning and detail of escalation from the individual officers and then up to team level. So that's what that comment is referring to. And yes, I think it was done.
Can you remember whether Graham Webb carried out his promised review?
Yes, I think he did, yeah.
And can you remember its essential findings now?
I think Graham was working to understand what had generated some of this backlog. And I think he worked through issues with staffing, materials supply delays, and also some process issues within the teams. I think that was the general background to it.
Thank you. Now, can we turn to a document entitled Health, Safety and Facilities Team Update from February 2016, and that can be found at TMO 00843644. And if we can look at item 3 on that first page, it says FRA and H&S actions. Barbara and I, in the second sentence, have met with Sacha, Pete, Alex and Graham Webb to look at the detail of the actions being raised and how each are to be progressed, accepted that there is no need to continue with these meetings, but just to identify the key trends, have now agreed an improved procedure with Repairs Direct, which should enable work to be progressed in a timely manner once backlog cleared. Now, was the meeting held to consider the backlog of FRA actions that had arisen about responsive repairs?
Yes, I think so. I can't recall it specifically.
Can you help as to why you attended but Mr. Maddison and Mr. Bosman did not?
This is because it's relating to Repairs Direct, I think. Oh, sorry, the earlier sentence is... No, I can't say. From this minute, it looks like it was a focus on Repairs Direct specifically.
Now, is it right that the new procedure would only be effective once the backlog had been cleared? Was that your view at the time?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Of course, yes. Was it your view that the new procedure that was proposed to be put in place would only be effective once the backlog itself had been cleared?
It's never good to have a backlog, so that is a given that has to be cleared. The procedure would be operational. I think they're two separate issues in my mind.
Now, why was it agreed that there would be no need to continue these meetings?
I think we had assumed that we'd got the right procedure and escalation and management processes in place, and so actually staff and the MD, Graham Webb, would be able to take responsibility for that.
And can you help us as to what the substance of those escalation procedures was?
That's about making sure that they escalated when items became overdue. So it's around priority and age.
And can you remember now, did the procedure achieve its stated goal of efficient and effective closing out of FRA actions?
Yes, I think it improved. Yes, definitely.
Now, can we move forward to an email sent by Janice Ray on the 7th of June 2017, which attached papers for a health and safety meeting, which was due to take place on the 13th of June. Now, the email, just for reference, is at TMO 00842 But what I'd like to go to is something called Paper 4, which concerned FRAs, which was attached to that email, and that can be found at TMO 00842 218. Now, what we have there is paper 4 entitled FRA's Current Progress with Completion of Actions. And if I could probably just invite you just to read that so you can familiarise yourself with it.
Yeah.
Now, what we have got here is a number of total outstanding actions. And if we look at the second page, and we have the age of the outstanding actions. Now, it appears that the age of looking at these total outstanding actions that's 4 months or older seems to be about 250 or thereabouts. Now, given the numbers that are summarised on this form, would you agree that there was still scope for very significant concern about the scale and the age of the backlog?
I think it's showing an improving position on the last month, and there are still outstanding actions that needed to be completed.
Now, can you help us as to why, certainly to the lay eye, there appear to be so many outstanding actions that are more than 4 months old?
I think you need to look at the detail behind the specific action to answer that question, and there'll be a range of different complexities around different activities in the different teams.
Can you help us as to why this form doesn't identify high risk, medium risk, low risk priorities here?
From recollection, we identified that elsewhere.
Surely it would have been useful to have that information on this sheet because it identifies the potential risk to residents who are affected by the relevant outstanding action. Would you agree with that?
It could be seen, yes, I do agree. And I think that a lot of that detail was being undertaken within the teams in the specific area and the heads of service.
But is there a prospect, though, that if the information regarding priority isn't set out in this document, the full consequence of failing to deal with the backlog isn't known to decision makers such as yourselves?
I think that people at the team would have been expressing that at the meeting and the trends.
You say would have been, did they?
I can't see the minutes, but from recollection, we had discussion around challenges that the teams were having over particular areas, and that committee was where we tried to understand what we could do to help unblock those problems.
Now, following on from that answer, where you've got these outstanding FRA actions that are more than 4 months old, can you set out for the panel what, if any, interim measures you put in place to address and mitigate the risk caused by the outstanding nature of the action?
I think that's hard to do that without seeing the actions and from recollection, I'm afraid.
Can you remember whether you yourself raised at this time concern about the raised risk that would be borne by a resident who was affected by an outstanding action?
I think from my perspective, I was always concerned and pushing and keen that the teams were able to resolve all of these matters as quickly as possible. And I think it's difficult here, without looking at the circumstances behind the actions, to give that detail to you.
To echo a previous answer to a previous question, was that concern essentially unspoken in these meetings?
I think we were all working together to try and work through these actions, and I think Barbara brought an additional focus to it.
Now, can we go to the minutes of the Health and Safety Committee that took place on the 13th of June 2017, so i.e. the one for which this paper was prepared, and they can be found at TMO 1007155. And if we could go to paragraph 3.1 on page 3. Actually, that can't be the right document. TMO 10017. It's the wrong document. So the reference you need is 100171155. Thank you. There we go, Health and Safety meeting, 13th of June 2017. You are listed fourth down on the list of apologies. And if we go to para 3.1 on page 3. There we go, into the heading of FRA actions. Barbara Matthews expressed concern at the volume of actions which remain outstanding. She emphasised the importance of completing these in a timely manner, not least because they will continue to be raised, particularly as the FRA reviews become more frequently. Now, would it be fair to say, on the basis of what is summarised there, that the large number of outstanding FRA actions were continuing to cause concern in June 2017?
I wasn't at that meeting, but that's what the minute says there.
And given the problems regarding the TMO's FRA arrangements have been identified sometime previously, would you accept that the problem had still not been resolved, certainly by the 14th of June 2017?
I think that there were multiple issues in trying to achieve clearing the backlog. I think we made good progress, particularly in the 6 month prior to that. And it would, in my experience, be difficult to ever get to zero when new actions are constantly being generated.
But notwithstanding the general nature of the last part of your answer, it is plain that Barbara Matthews was not assured that sufficient progress was being made. That's a fair reading of what is summarised at 3.1, isn't it?
Of what's summarised here, but I think Barbara was also working very closely with myself and the teams, and she understood in some detail the actions that we were taking. And I think this is expressing the urgency and the need to keep up the focus. And certainly there are a number of people at this meeting, a much wider group of people at this meeting, and that would be important that they understood that executive view.
Now, can you recall what Mr. Black's view was in relation to outstanding FRA actions in the 6 months before the fire in 2017?
I think Mr. Black understood that we were managing this process. He understood the challenges, and that we, myself and Barbara, through this Health and Safety Committee, were trying hard to complete them and rectify the issues.
Now, I'm now going to move on to a separate issue, which is self-closing devices on flat front entrance doors. Now, on the 12th of October 2015, the LFB issued a deficiency notice to the TMO in respect of Adair Tower. First of all, were you aware of the fact of the issue of that notice?
I was aware of it in terms of discussions at the executive team, yes.
Yeah. And were you aware of the particular deficiencies that had been identified by the LFB?
Yeah, I had an overview of that, yes.
Overview, does that mean you'd read the notice?
I can't recall at the time, because I know that Barbara Matthews was managing this process with Janice and the fire brigade, but I certainly had an executive team overview of it.
And can you remember whether your staff were involved in remedying the deficiencies identified by the LFB in that notice?
There would have been, yes.
Now, a fire broke out at Adair Tower on the 31st of October 2015, so 19 days after the deficiency notice had been issued. Now, as a consequence of that fire, Janice Ray met Rebecca Burton of the LFB on the 13th of November 2015. Janice Ray emailed you and others at the TMO following that meeting. And if we could go to that email, which is at TMO 840415. There you go, and you can see the email sent on the 13th of November at 17:52, your last of the addressees. And if we could go to, she just confirms there in the opening paragraph that she'd met Rebecca Burton. And if we go to the penultimate paragraph on page 2 of this chain, which starts, however. She says, however, it seems that specifically they, the LFB, are focusing on self-closers on flat entrance doors and ventilation. Her, that's Rebecca Burton's stated preference would be to have both staircases closed as opposed to one unenclosed. However, she is keen to see the reviewed risk assessment. I asked if she needed to see action on both of these points. If we fitted self-closers, could she accept the ventilation? And she reiterated that she needed to see the revised FRA. I had the impression that if the FRA recognised the need to fit self-closers, and this was programmed swiftly for both blocks, this might be acceptable. Now, can we look next at the email you sent on the 17th of November 2015, so 4 days afterwards, which is at TMO 00840 I'll just let you have a quick read of that email to refamiliarise yourself with it. Would you like the document manager to scroll down?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Now, essentially, and correct me if this is unfair, your view is the TMO should push back against the LFB's position based on what Carl Stokes had said in his FRA. Would you agree with that as a fair and accurate summary of your view in this email?
I think from recollection, what we're trying to work out here is the practical element of the door closer programme. So we're saying here about wait and see from the FRA advice. I can't recall it specifically. I can only see what I've written here.
Okay. Now, in due course, an enforcement notice was issued by the LFB in respect of Adair Tower on the 23rd of December 2015. And if we could go to TMO 00840 Can you remember when you first saw that enforcement notice?
No, I can't. I'm sorry, no.
Presumably, given what you'd already been told and read and seen, you were not surprised by its content, i.e. the issue with the lack of self-closers on doors. Is that right? If you want to see the further elements of the notice.
Yes, okay, yes.
If we could turn over the page. And then turn over again.
Yeah.
So you weren't surprised?
My understanding is that they were asking us to make sure that we did a programme of fire door closers on Adair Tower. That's my recollection of what happened.
Now, was the issue of self-closers something which fell within the remit of asset and regeneration?
No, the self-closers would have been repairs direct, unless it was a specific capital programme of fire door replacement.
Now, if we can now turn to the TMO Health and Safety Committee that met on 19th of January 2016, and those minutes can be found at TMO 100111986. There we go, you're an attendee, second left-hand column. We can go to page 5 and item 7. We have health and safety KPIs. 7.1, Janice Ray has put together a list of proposed KPIs which can be edited by the committee. Janice Ray asked the committee to let her know if they have any changes within the next 2 weeks. 7.2, it would be useful to develop a process to show that the detection systems that have been installed have been checked. The LFB have suggested that detection systems and door closers need to be tested. Peter Madison and Sacha Jevans discussed the difference between TMO's legal obligations and LFB aspirations. TMO will have to consider whether this work is feasible in terms of cost and practicality. Janice Ray to check TMO obligations in relation to this. 7.3, just for sake of completeness, Sacha Jevans asked Janice Ray to transfer the KPIs into a management report for the next committee meeting, with items yet to be decided being left blank. Now, looking back at paragraph 7.2, and in particular the penultimate sentence, which refers to your discussion with Peter Madison about the difference between legal obligations and LFB aspirations, was the thrust of that discussion that the TMO should only do what it was strictly legally required to do?
I think we were always set up to make sure we installed and maintained fire doors and fire door closers or fire door sets that come with that. The inspection process is a different process completely. And what Peter Madison and myself were discussing here is that the LFB had suggested an inspection process, which is very different to maintenance and fitting of fire doors and fire door closers. It would require a different set of procedures and a different way of structuring our organisation, which we currently weren't set up to do, and that's what we were trying to work out. And if I just draw a comparison with the gas safety individual boiler checks, we had a team of 3 people doing that. It was an obligation. You had to do a gas safety boiler once every 12 months. And so you'd have to, that process of getting access, where you take on that liability, could take up to 2 months, with resulting in an injunction to get access. So we were trying to work out whether our tenancy agreement and whether we could structure the organisation to deliver an inspection programme. That's the difference here, and I think that's what we were going out to check.
Now, if we can now look at what happened at the board meeting in March 2016, and those minutes are at TMO 100-13646. And we can see you're present. So at the bottom of the page. I think you're there 5th from the bottom. And if we can turn to page 2, we see item 9, Chief Executive's report. 9.1, Barbara Matthews presented the Chief Exec's report to the board. She drew the attention of the board to the progress update on the enforcement notices received in respect of Adair and Hazelwood Towers following the fire at Adair Tower. And then 9.2, Jeff Zitron questioned why enforcement notices had been issued, given the fact that the company had commissioned and had valid fire risk assessments in place at the time of the fire incident. Sacha Jevans explained that the fire risk assessment had been, even though there were no issues reported by the consultant, the London Fire Brigade in their fire audit before the fire incident, the occurrence of the fire had created the opportunity to reassess the acceptable standard, which then led to the issuance of the enforcement notices. It was reiterated that the key area of focus for the notices were the ventilation in the stairwells and self-closures on all flat entry doors. Simon Brissenden commented on the qualification of the risk assessors being used by the company and reiterated the need to use experienced consultants who could highlight any eventualities as well in their reviews of the properties. And the board agreed that the company needed to reconsider the frequency of the fire risk assessments being undertaken and the installation of door closers. Barbara Matthews confirmed that it was intended to install door closers by the deadline and negotiate an extension of the works required on the ventilation issues. The board requested that a report on the conclusions of the review of the stock should be presented at a future meeting covering any decisions and recommendations in respect of a fire incident. Now, the pre-fire deficiency notice in relation to Adair Tower was not mentioned at all in that summary you gave to the board. Can you explain why not?
I can't recall the sequence of events at that time, I'm afraid. I'm not sure.
Well, the enforcement notice was issued on the 12th of October. The fire happened on the 31st of October. Would you agree that not putting the fact of the enforcement notice, the pre-fire enforcement notice, before the board had the potential to mislead them regarding the nature and duration of the LFB's concerns about self-closures at Adair Tower? Deficiency notice, sorry.
I think that my understanding of a deficiency notice is it's picking up areas of concern that need to be implemented, which is different to the enforcement notice. So it's possible that we were working through that and we're trying to understand what to implement. But I'm afraid I can't recall this discussion.
But would you agree that not identifying the fact of the deficiency notice and its contents had the potential to mislead the board about the nature and duration of the LFB's concerns about door closures at Adair Tower?
I think it was an ongoing discussion, door closures, and a priority. So I'm not sure about mislead, but information, obviously at board level, is helpful.
And it was a material fact which would have been relevant to the board's considerations, wouldn't it? The fact of the deficiency notice and its substance.
I think it would have been helpful for them to know that on reflection, yes.
You said the occurrence of the fire had created the opportunity to reassess the acceptable standards, which then led to the issuance of the enforcement notices. On what basis did you say that?
I think what had happened is that we'd had a fire risk assessment from Carl Stokes. They'd never picked up this issue before around ventilation. And also the LFB hadn't picked up that in their visits. But what I understood the LFB was saying after the fire is that now that they had seen how smoke travelled around the building, having had a real live fire, that their original assessment wasn't correct, and that's why they wanted to reassess it. And the enforcement notice was because you'd have to change the original design of the building.
Doesn't that answer give the impression that you're trying to attribute responsibility to the LFB rather than to yourselves?
No, I don't think so. I think it is a reality. It's a situation that they hadn't picked it up, neither had our fire consultant, and once a fire had happened and they'd seen how smoke travelled around the building, they wanted to reassess that. I think it wasn't attributable to anyone in particular. I think it was the reality and the fact that now there'd been a fire, and bear in mind the block is a number of years old, that actually needed to be changed then.
But I hope I'm right in saying that the minute set out there puts the weight of responsibility for the change on the LFB rather than anyone else. Would you agree with that?
Well, I
this
think
so-called reassessment.
I think it was driven by the LFB that they felt that there needed to be changes to the building following their assessment of the fire. And you know, the TMO was there to make sure that we did the works on recommendation of either our consultant or the LFB.
Now, it says there that Simon Brisson commented on the qualification of the risk assessors being used by the company and reiterated the need to use experienced consultants. Can you remember any more detail about the comment made by Mr. Brissenden there?
No, I think he was asking the question in the board, and I assume Barbara Matthews would have answered that question, or Mr. Black.
Did you have cause to question Mr. Stokes's competency as a result of the facts and matters arising out of the Adair Tower fire?
No.
Now, can we turn to a TMO executive team meeting that took place on the 5th of October 2016, which you again attended, and that can be found at TMO 00843861. Thank you. Adair Tower is at item 3, which is at page 2. And we can see at 3.2, it says this: the LFB are putting pressure on us to fit door closers on all our stock across the business. Laura Johnson has said no to this, but Sacha feels that there should be a discussion at ET. Insofar as you're able to answer this, why had Laura Johnson said no?
I think Laura had to make a consideration on a balance of maybe budget versus practicalities. And this is an example of something that would be outside of the agreed budget and that would be unforeseen, and so the TMO would need to go back to the council and ask for more money.
Now, on the basis of this, you don't appear to agree with Laura Johnson and felt that there should be presumably broader discussion at the executive team. Can you remember now what were your concerns at the time? This is, say, October 2016.
I think that it was quite clear from the LFB that we should fit door closers on all the stock, and I was keen for that to happen.
Item 3.2 goes on to say this: the fire strategy has been updated with the recommendation that this work is done over a 5-year period, although it's likely the LFB will expect a shorter period. Sacha will speak to her team about doing some profiling on this, as with 9,000 properties, we would need to know the estimated cost for this and also what others are doing. RBKC would need to be spoken to about this and given options. Can you remember now, where did the 5-year time frame come from?
I think that came from RBKC, if I recall.
Why did they pitch for a longer time frame when it was known or anticipated that the LFB would want a shorter time frame?
I think that's a question for RBKC, and they had their ways of profiling their housing revenue account and the amount of works that they put into capital investment for the TMO.
And flowing from that and previous answers, the final sentence here, which says RBKC would need to be spoken to about this and given options, presumably because extra funds would be required and it could only come from RBKC.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. Now, on the 17th of November 2016, a deficiency notice was issued by the LFB in relation to Grenfell, following an LFB inspection. Now, that notice is at TMO 100172554. If we go to page 5 of that document. I'll let you familiarise yourself with what's set out there, and when you need the page to be moved on, please say so.
Yes, okay.
Okay. Now, sorry, I'll let you read the rest.
Yeah.
Now, if I could ask us to go back to page 5. Would you agree that it was now crystal clear that the LFB were concerned about the failure to maintain flat entrance doors, particularly in relation to self-closing devices in numerous TMO blocks?
I think they had identified that, yes, I agree.
And would you agree that given the deadline was set for the 18th of May 2017, that time was of the essence in remedying the deficiencies identified here?
Yes.
Now, looking at some of these items in the notice and looking at the second one on the page we're looking at now, fire doors not fitting into their frames, would you say that had been an issue for Repairs Direct?
So if it wasn't part of the original capital replacement programme within the defects period, then anything thereafter in terms of a responsive repair or repair to a particular door, individual door, would be Repairs Direct.
A breach in the service duct, is that something for the contracts team or someone else?
I'm not sure.
If you're looking at the first deficiency, Article 11. It's the final bit, penultimate, the final sentence of that, the particulars of that breach. Or should I say deficiency?
I think that would have gone to to Repairs Direct.
And so absence of self-closers in flats 44 and 153, which is over the page, would that be Repairs Direct again?
Yes.
Storage of items in common parts, would that be for housing management rather than Repairs Direct?
Housing management, yes.
And lack of fire action notices, whose responsibility was that?
That was Health and Safety Team, Janice Ray.
Can you help the panels to whether all of those deficiencies were remedied by the 14th of June 2017?
I expect so. I can't recall.
Can you remember whether you yourself were required to take particular action to remedy these deficiencies?
Not myself. I think Janice Ray would make sure that these actions went out to the teams. I think what we did identify is that that the Health and Safety Committee and Janice Ray was overseeing deficiency notice in a separate process to the FRA actions, and I think it was identified that we really needed a much stronger management control over the deficiency notice actions, so that as an executive team we could make sure that they were completed, the actions that came out of deficiency notices.
Bear in mind your executive role and the fact you were a director of Repairs Direct as well. What did you do to ensure that those tasks that fell to Repairs Direct were done by the prescribed deadline of the 18th of May?
I think that was, so those actions were delegated to Graham Webb, and as a board we oversaw that, and particularly Barbara Matthews, who was on the board, had responsibility for managing Janice Ray, who managed the deficiency notices, so it was very much her responsibility as well, working with me to make sure that anything that was overdue was escalated. And I think that is the issue that I was referring to, is that we identified we needed a much closer management control over deficiency notices, which was separate and outside of the FRA assessment process that we'd been focusing on.
Now we're going to move on to a separate topic now, which is maintenance of fire safety systems. And could I ask you to go to paragraph 76 and 77 of your witness statement, which is at TMO 000000893 and internal 14 to 15. Now there you, in 76, set out where responsibility lay. 77, you say this: elements of safety were nevertheless an important element of my job, generally as an executive director, but also specifically in relation to the work that was undertaken within the operations department by Repairs Direct. I saw my safety role as providing leadership in the operations directorate, putting structures in place with competent staff, and to show support for safety initiatives whenever possible. I can recall receiving training on matters such as safety leadership from an external consultant called Matt Hodgson. Now, to summarise this, you weren't formally responsible for health and safety at the TMO. That's plain from the evidence previously. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Yeah.
But you had the oversight responsibility for health and safety as an executive director.
Yes.
And as the operations department and Repairs Direct carried out work to health and safety systems, you had a responsibility for that. Is that right?
Yes.
And you provided health and safety leadership by putting structures in place and showing support for health and safety initiatives. Is that fair?
Yes.
What structures are you referring to in paragraph 77 at the top of the page, putting structures in place?
As an example, when we were looking at the design of Repairs Direct and how that company structure and the management structure should be devised, we specifically felt that we should have a dedicated health and safety role that in Repairs Direct. So that would be an example of that.
Did you or Yvonne Birch, or indeed anyone else, organise any specific training on the maintenance of fire safety systems for your staff, whether in the Operations Directorate or at Repairs Direct?
I had an expectation that Graham Webb was managing the training and the health of the operatives within Repairs Direct. and I believe he did have a training programme and put some focus on that. And across the organisation, I know there was specific training for our estate services assistants, our caretakers in the neighbourhood team, and I know Yvonne Birch and her team implemented a corporate-wide e-learning training on health and safety. So there were a number of different aspects to it.
So were your expectations as to the detail and quality of health and safety training satisfied?
I think it's an area that's large, and I think it has to be ongoing. And I did rely on some of the expertise from the health and safety team to advise adequately on what the training needs are for the teams.
But bearing in mind your ultimate executive responsibility, were you satisfied as to the quality and detail of the health and safety training given to your staff?
I think the e-learning module that we put in place covered a range of the health and safety for the organisation, and I think that was adequate at the time.
Now, can we look at the TMO's fire safety strategy and what it says particularly about the maintenance of fire safety systems? And the strategy itself can be found at TMO 008305998. And if we can go to paragraph 1.1 on the first page, and it says this: as acknowledged in the TMO Health and Safety Policy Statement, the company is fully committed to providing a safe and healthy environment for residents, employees and contractors. The area of fire safety in particular is highlighted as being of significant importance in a residential setting, and as such is an area which is subject to intensive inspection, maintenance and assessment activity. Now, flows from that it appears to be the intention that the TMO would have an quotes, intensive maintenance regime. Is that correct? That was the intention.
Yes, from that paragraph, yes.
Yeah. Which is the fire safety strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we turn to page 3 of this document? If we can look under this and we go, just looking at the first substantive bullet point at the top, which starts inspection, testing and maintenance of all fire safety systems, plant and equipment as per the requirements of the relevant British standard by competent contractors under a planned preventative maintenance regime. In the case of emergency lighting, the maintenance contractors' regular checks are supplemented by monthly inspection and testing by the estate staff. Records are maintained of these checks. Now, would you agree with the general proposition that this bullet point, this substance, identifies the policy objective rather than the practical arrangements by which the objective is to be achieved?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Sorry.
This sets out the objective, not
Yeah.
the practical arrangements to achieve that objective. Would you agree with that proposition?
Well, competent contractors under a planned preventative maintenance regime is the application of the
Okay.
policy.
Now, would you agree, looking at it slightly differently, that there is no description here of what a planned preventative maintenance regime would look like? Would you agree with that?
Yes, I'd agree. It's not in detail, no.
And would you agree that there is no comprehensive, or indeed any, list of the fire safety measures that would be subject to the preventative maintenance regime?
Not in this document, no.
And there is no mention, for example, that the smoke control system would require planned preventative maintenance. Would you agree with that?
Not in that paragraph, no. I don't know if it's somewhere else in the document.
We'll develop this in due course, but there is no list there of the relevant standards to which systems should be maintained. Would you agree with that?
It's not a detailed list. I think it is an overview statement. Yeah.
And it doesn't identify which department or departments would be responsible for maintaining fire safety systems, does it?
Not in detail here. I think it's a strategy, so it's meant to give an overarching approach to our fire safety.
Well, let's look at the procedure that was drafted to supplement the policy. And that, the first version, is dated the 10th of February 2012, and that can be found at TMO 00870933. Now, first of all, were you familiar with this document during your time at the TMO?
I knew of it, but I didn't know it in detail because this was one of those areas that would have been managed through Mr. Madison and his team.
So you never read it?
Not indeed. No, I don't think I would have done.
Can we turn over to page 2 and paragraph 1.2? And there we have a list of systems: sprinklers, fire alarms, wet and dry risers, domestic smoke alarms, fire extinguishers, hose reels. Would you agree that there was no mention there of smoke control systems?
Not in that list, no.
Can you help us to why the smoke control system was not identified there?
I can't help in the drafting of this document. No, sorry.
So you can't help in respect of any of the substance of this?
No.
So you wouldn't be able to assist why there's no detail as to how a planned preventative maintenance regime would be carried out in relation to communal fire doors or flat entrance doors or door closers?
I can't, because this sort of level of detail in terms of procedure would have been drafted from the expertise of the health and safety team in conjunction with the contract management team and any other external guidance or resource that we needed. And it really wouldn't be within my scope to comment on this type of level of detail.
Now, can we go back to the Hodgson review from 2013 and in particular some of the points he made in respect of planned maintenance? And if we go to TMO 10003 and page 19. And it's the top of the page with the first paragraph which starts, there is a policy arrangement section. In the KCTMO policy, however, it does not adequately detail what risks the business is exposed to and lacks the finer detail to explain exactly what processes, risk assessments, British standard checks and tests, best practice inspections, etc., should be implemented in order to fully meet the statutory and mandatory obligations in relation to the plant and equipment under KCTMO control across the estate. The following issues require attention. There are only a handful of arrangements in the policy. Many are missing, e.g. pressure vessels, working at height, contractor management, etc. And many of the fire arrangements have been bunched together, and by doing so lack the detail in relation to what the planned preventative maintenance process should look like, e.g. all fire protection systems recorded together. Now, Mr. Hodgson made that point in 2013, that there appeared to be a lack of detail in relation to the planned preventative programme, what it should look like. Do you remember that conclusion of his?
I don't recall it. I can see it here, but I don't recall it at the time. But what I would say is that my expectation would have been that Anthony Parks at the time would have led on making sure the policies are correct, and that following up from this report, redrafting and the correct policies were put in place with in conjunction with the contract management team and any other advice that we needed.
Given that your department or sub-departments within it would be involved in those discussions, did you make any contribution to ensuring these deficiencies were remedied?
I'm sure there was discussion in the monthly health and safety meetings. In terms of my technical input, I really don't have that technical background, so it wouldn't be for me to make comment on a ventilation system. I don't have that technical expertise.
Now, can we look at the fifth paragraph on this page, which is the one at the very bottom of the screen at the moment, which starts the policy arrangements? And they refer to the purpose of this procedure is to identify the action to be taken by the TMO following a report of a breakdown or malfunction. This is a reactive approach to health and safety, when the real purpose of effective policy arrangements is to clearly define the planned preventative maintenance regime that should be followed to cover statutory and mandatory processes to keep the TMO stock operating effectively and safely, i.e. it's about compliance and not breakdown. Now again, Mr. Hodgson makes the point that TMO has a reactive approach to maintenance. Would you agree with that as a fair summary of his view?
I think that was his point at this point. Sorry, that was his remark at this point in time. And I think we understood about planned preventative maintenance, and that was what we were working to pick up this gap. That's why we did this audit, to make sure we understood what we needed to do.
Now, he recommended a full review of the property policy arrangements. Was that full review carried out?
This would have been the responsibility of Anthony Parks on policy.
Do you remember being involved in that review at all?
Not myself, but I would have expected that to, if it was happening, to have happened with the technical teams, so that they can input the right technical knowledge into policy decisions.
And so you won't be able to assist the panel on what, if any, policies were changed or what, if any, new policies were introduced?
No, I think that's a health and safety team. I'm afraid, no, I couldn't.
Now, can we turn to the topic of repairs direct, and in particular, first of all, oversight and the managerial role? Just to summarise, am I correct in thinking that from the date of its incorporation in 2013, reactive repairs were carried out by Repairs Direct?
Yes, that's right.
And Repairs Direct was a wholly owned subsidiary of the TMO, is that
That's
correct?
right, yeah.
And as we touched on earlier, you were a director of Repairs Direct,
Yes.
and along with, you're a member of the board along with Barbara Matthews when she joined in 2015.
Yes, that's right.
Was Anthony Parks a director before Barbara Matthews joined? Can you remember?
Yes, I believe he was, yeah.
And as a board member of Repairs Direct, you would have had an oversight role into health and safety, is that right?
In all our roles, we've got an element of health and safety, but on the board, I would have expected and did expect Anthony Parks and then Barbara Matthews to have the health and safety oversight of Repairs Direct, and that I would have the operational response effectively.
But as you said earlier, everyone in a business has a health and safety role.
I think that's a given at an executive level, yeah.
And so you had some function in that respect.
Yes, I do, but I think we all had to take a focus in different areas. It's, you know, it's a lot of work, and we took different leads, and that's where the responsibility sat on the...
Now, you referred to a dotted line responsibility earlier, and I said we'd take you to the document, and that document is the TMO Board Members Handbook, and it can be found at TMO 1000358. And if we go to page 11 within that document, there we go. And I suppose the first question is, you can see the Managing Director of Repairs Direct, MD, a dotted line through to Executive Director of Operations, off-centre. And is that the dotted line to which you were referring earlier?
Yeah.
Now, in your witness statement to paragraph 29, we don't need to go back to it, but you say Graham was directly responsible, so that's Graham Webb, was directly accountable to the Repairs Direct Board. However, I had a dotted line management function over him. This meant that if Graham wanted to apply for leave or if he needed support, he could turn to me. Graham was in the same pay grade as me to reflect the fact that Repairs Direct was intended to be largely self-sufficient on a day-to-day basis. Now, just to give some context for the panel and anyone listening, Mr. Webb was MD from January 2016 until November 2017, is that correct?
I think so. I recall December 2015, but yes, that
Thereabouts.
period. Yes.
Now, can you help us? What does that, or what did that dotted line mean in practice?
I mean, in practice, somebody has to have some point of contact into the organisation, and so it really is about annual leave, some basic, so some employment oversight, but also, you know, if he did want to talk to me, he could do. We could discuss his general progress and making sure that he had the resources in place in MD to fulfil his responsibilities.
Now, the impression from this organogram is that you, as Executive Director of Operations, had direct responsibility for the management of the MD for Repairs Direct. Is that a fair and accurate summary?
No, I don't think so. I think it is a dotted line, and actually the manager, it was a separate limited company, and he was responsible to the board, and that was a collective group of people under their responsibilities as company directors, and he was accountable to that board.
Now, can we look to a 2016 version of the organogram, which is at TMO 1001499 and page 13. Now, you'll see there you at the top. The dotted line to the MD of Repairs Direct has gone. Can you explain why?
No, what's the date of this one?
This one's 16.
16. No, I can't explain why. Sorry, no, it is missing.
Okay. Now, can we now move on to the topic of concerns with the quality and efficiency of repairs direct service? And could we, first of all, turn to RBK 000 60576? Now, as its frontispiece indicates, this is a final audit report, May 2014, into Repairs Direct, conducted by RBKC. First of all, did you receive a copy of this report?
I think I would have done, yes.
And did you read it?
Yes.
Now, can we turn to page 6 within this document? Now, if we look at the last paragraph on this page, it explains that it was an interim audit and a follow-up audit would be undertaken on the progress and direction of travel of the service after a full year of operation. And if we can stay within this document but go on to page 12, and you'll see in the top left-hand corner, Management Action Plan, underneath that, Repairs Quality Monitoring, and you'll see there an areas of concern identified at the bottom of the far left-hand column. And the first one identified is general level of poor quality workmanship. And if we go over the page, we'll see the third bullet point from the top, failure by some operatives to adhere to basic health and safety processes. Final bullet point, quality of work produced by subcontractors is not included in surveys. And if we can turn to the management response at page 14, and we see there the third bullet point on that page, in the bottom half of that page, says greater focus on the quality of workmanship during the post-inspection process. Fourth bullet point says there will be further health and safety training with random spot checks on both employees and subcontractors. Now, first of all, did you agree with the analysis of failings that was described to be balanced and fair in the opening line of this management response at the top of the page?
I think that we were 5 months into a new service, and this did identify some of the issues, so yes, that would be fair.
And can you remember now, what practical steps did you yourself take to remedy the identified failings?
So the managing director was directly responsible, but there are a number of actions you can see here, and we worked our way through those, and we discussed that at board level. And there was a lot of work in terms of, I know Graham was doing a lot of work in terms of these particular items, focus groups. So, for example, we had a lot of work in the contact centre on our processes, a lot of work on improving the IT systems. We did health and safety gap analysis, more training. So we had a range of different elements to cover. And what I would say is that we had just taken over, and we were 5 months in, and so the staff are tupied from Wilmot Dixon, from the previous contractor. So some of their culture and experiences would have come from Morrison, which I mentioned earlier, then tupied over into Wilmot Dixon, and then tupied over into, transferred into Repairs Direct. So 5 months in, you would have to do a lot of work around culture and training and starting to embed your processes. So it was at that point in time, and there were lots of different work streams.
When Mr. Webb started at the TMO, did the board or indeed anyone else brief him on the conclusions of this audit and what had been done to remedy the deficiencies?
Sorry, Mr. Black?
Mr. Webb.
Mr. Webb? Can you repeat your question? Sorry.
Yes, of course. When Mr. Webb started work at the TMO, so whether it's December 2015 or January 2016, did you or anyone else brief him on the contents of this audit report and what had been done to remedy the identified deficiencies?
Yeah, he would have been aware of this report and all of...
Sorry, can I stop you?
Yeah.
Would have been or was?
I can't specifically recall at the time, but...
So you're assuming he was briefed?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, could I now take you to an email from Andrea Newton of the Lancaster West Residents Association, and that's at TMO 100-26082. If I could ask you to go to page 3 within that email chain. And there you see at the top the email from Andrea Newton, email sent on the 9th of March 2016 at 8:59, addressed to you, as well as Mr. Black and others, but you're specified as the addressee. And she raised a number of concerns about the repairs service being provided, saying, I feel there is a huge lack of coordination within TMO and RD Repairs Direct, and that's set out in the 5th line of that email. She then goes on to explain the substance in detail of her concerns. Now, my first question is, at the time, was it your assessment that there was a lack of coordination, whether it's huge or not, between the TMO and Repairs Direct?
I'm not quite sure what between the TM and RD. I think there were a huge number of processes in a responsive repair service, and the residents' entry point into the organisation would have been through the contact centre. So I'm not sure how wide that means in terms of the TMO. And the contact centre is where residents would report repairs, and then they'd be raised, and Repairs Direct would complete them. So I think that's what she's referring to.
Just go further down into email, and you'll see 3rd paragraph below the 5th line, which starts, but despite management at TMO literally micromanaging specific repairs that are then passed on to the relevant people within the repairs department, staff are seeming to completely ignore procedure or are incapable of getting bookings finalised and contractors to arrive to the jobs on the right day, if at all. And then she goes on to give other practical examples. Was that a concern that was more broadly expressed by residents in TMO housing stock to you at the time?
I think we were trying to get feedback from residents, and we were always working on trying to improve. And one of the areas that needed improvement was the contact centre diagnosis, and then the planning process, which is about getting the jobs to the contractors. And then we had a series of issues with subcontractors and appointment systems, and we also had processes to get right with materials suppliers. So there are at least 10 to 15 points at which every responsive repair could create a interruption, so to speak. And so I think it's not straightforward. It's quite complex, and I think that's what we're working on, and that's what she's referring to.
I think my question was, put differently, is Andrea Newton's email, is that an exemplar of broader concerns that were expressed to you via residents when you asked for their feedback?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I can't. This is one email. I'm not sure that I saw other information from residents expressing that, but I think we definitely knew the areas we needed to focus on, which I've just sort of gone over with you.
Okay. So I'm mindful of the time. This is probably as convenient point as any to break.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Yes, well, we'll stop at this point, Ms. Jevans, so we can all go and get some lunch. We'll resume at 2:00, please.
Okay.
And remember not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it over the break. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to give the usher, please. Thank you. 2:00 then, please.
Thanks, sir.